always pleased to be able to say an organization that I have admired tremendously for its work on immigration issues is represented with us today by Chris Chmielenski. He is the Deputy Director of Numbers USA. He runs its grassroots networks, which are formidable, and he is also responsible for one of the most important scorecards in Washington, D.C., and that is Numbers' reckoning of who is behaving responsibly and the many who are not when it comes to matters involving border security and the interior security of our country um, in the Numbers portfolio. And Chris, it's always good to have a chance to catch up with you, even though usually it's an opportunity to.
Right, right. Thanks for having me back, Frank, and always good to be here.
Well, it's always a pleasure to have you, even if the tidings are grim. Let me ask you,
Yeah.
as a guy who specializes in numbers, to give us your current update on the numbers of people that are coming to this country illegally, both those that we are actually confident we know their numbers and the estimates of those that are the so-called getaways.
Yeah. Well, we had a record-setting month back in April with 234,000. They call them encounters. That's a combination of both Border Patrol apprehensions, but also people who are inadmissible but present themselves to customs agents at port of entries. It's a bit deceiving just because the government's really only been tracking this number dating back to about 2000. So we know that there were really high numbers as well in the 90s, but still, 235,000, the highest number in 2 decades, is pretty
Mm,
large. About
serious.
Yeah, and about three-quarters of them are single adults.
Mm.
And that's concerning for its own reason. But we've got about another 36,000 family units and about 11 or 12,000 unaccompanied minors who make up that larger number.
And when you say single adults,
Yeah.
three-quarters of them, how many of those are male single adults of, well, military age, perhaps?
Right, probably almost all of them. Now, the
Wow.
the the somewhat good news is that at least in April, the Biden administration turned away about 92,000, mostly of those single adult males, due to the Title 42 restrictions. But we know that they're lifting those, so that's going to come to an end. And still, the
There's a
question
federal
is,
judge who said no, but
right, right.
you anticipate that that will be overcome and that they will be back in uh, business
Yeah,
with a surge that is hard to imagine how much worse this will be.
right, I do, because we're still talking about a discretionary power. So just because a judge says that they have to keep Title 42 in place, and as we've seen, we had of those 234,000 total encounters, 200,000 of them were actual apprehensions by Border Patrol along the border. Only 93,000 of them were turned away under Title 42. So
Wow.
the administration is using some discretion there on who they apply Title 42
Mhm.
to, and all they're going to do is they're going to continue to shrink that field so it applies to almost no one. Yeah, they can still say it's in place, but it's not impacting anybody.
Right. It's honored in the breach, as they say.
Right,
Um,
right.
Chris, when you talk about the Biden administration's policies, um, this is clearly purposeful. They have essentially ripped up by the roots the policies that were in place under the Trump administration, and that largely made this a containable, if still challenging, issue of border security. Um, my friend and colleague Steve Bannon has talked a lot about the numbers involved as really being multiples of a D-Day style invasion.
Yeah.
Is invasion the right term to use, do you think, to describe what's happening to our country now?
I mean, invasion is a pretty strong word, but the only reason why I stopped short of calling it invasion is because we have an administration that's allowing that are welcoming these folks.
Sure.
So you
An
don't
uncontested
typically.
invasion.
Right. So you don't typically welcome invaders, but I think President Biden was certainly when he campaigned back in 2020, he made it pretty clear that he didn't support mass enforcement, that he was going to use targeted enforcement, and that his approach to border security was definitely less than what we've seen from President Trump, but even less than what we saw under the Obama era. But essentially, what he's done is he's put somebody in Alejandro Mayorkas in charge of DHS, and Secretary Mayorkas is pretty much as close to open borders as you can get. Um, so, when you have somebody who's leading the immigration efforts here in the country in Mayorkas, yeah, I, I can see why people want to call it an invasion, but at the same time, we're inviting it. So
Yeah.
the policies of the Biden administration are certainly inviting these folks to come here.
Well, that makes all the more egregious what's happening, of
Right,
course.
right.
But I want to get at the underbelly of that welcoming,
Hmm.
because I don't think we get nearly enough information about this. And I think for many of us, what's happening at the border is still not as clear as you've just made it, Chris. But talk a little bit about what happens when these people get here.
Yeah,
It's my understanding that they are being essentially disseminated all over the United States, and I'm just trying to figure out what happens to them then.
right, right.
They're obviously wards of the state, I guess, but who's picking up the tab and how sizable is it?
Yeah, yeah. Well, when we consider the fact that in April alone you had 201,000 apprehensions and by Border Patrol officers, and then only about 92,000 of them were expelled. So that leaves another 102 or 108,000 that are being relocated into the United States. And the Biden administration isn't exactly being very candid about where they're sending these folks. So if it weren't for a couple of noisy governors, we wouldn't know where these people are going. We know a lot of them are being sent to Florida, but they're being sent to the interior all across this country. Which brings up the old adage: every state is a border state right now, and it's
Right.
true because they're relocating these illegal border crossers everywhere. Tremendous burden on taxpayers. A lot of them come with a couple of bucks in their back pocket, and that's about it. So what are they going to do? They're going to take jobs that Americans could be working instead. They're going to take that money under the table, and they're going to probably rely on some government services to make ends meet.
So let me just make sure I get this straight. You're saying that they are eligible to work, or they're simply going to work illegally.
Right,
They'll make up whatever shortfalls they find, and presumably they're considerable,
right,
with
right.
subventions of various kinds. And it's not just living expenses. It's
Hmm.
is it housing? Is it education? Is it healthcare? What else is involved in
So what essentially
export?
we're seeing is that many of the folks that are coming in that aren't being subjected to Title 42, even though Title 42 really prevents folks from applying for asylum, there are still some that are applying for asylum and getting through that. And once they apply for asylum, they can get a work authorization in about 30 to 90 days. And then others are being paroled for humanitarian reasons, most likely because they claim that they have a close family member somewhere in the United States. So they're getting work documents. So a lot of these folks, we're a big champion in mandating e-verify nationwide to help control illegal immigration. Unfortunately, this is one example where
This is a mechanism whereby employers can certify that people are legally here. Is that
their
right?
workers are authorized to work in the United States, right? And but this is one of those situations where E-Verify probably wouldn't deter most of these illegal border crossings because the Biden administration is giving them EADs, employment authorization documents. As for the public benefits, because of their status, they may not be able to access direct like SNAP payments or housing subsidies. But what's happening is the government is giving block grants to religious charity groups,
Mm,
other NGOs that are then providing these benefits, these taxpayer
yeah.
benefits to the illegal aliens.
So it's still coming out of the taxpayer's pocket. It's just
Exactly,
being
exactly.
channeled through these outfits, which, let's face it, do it for profit.
Right, right.
Charitable organizations, though they may
Yes,
be, or religious ones for that matter. Chris, this is very ominous, I have to say. And just to tie these two pieces together,
sure.
you're talking about people we don't know exactly what their intent is in a lot of
Right,
cases.
right.
They're military age males in most cases. They're being disseminated across our country into, well, black holes, certainly in the dark of night. Um, what could possibly go wrong? I guess is the question. Is it
I,
possible that we could see, terrorism or worse
yeah, yeah,
at their hands?
and I apologize for laughing, but that's basically the situation that we've come into. It's the only way you can look at it is,
Come
I
into,
mean,
we've been brought into by
brought
this
into. What
administration.
are they
Let's be
doing?
fair.
One of the things that I want to point out is not just the folks that might be the possible threats that might be hidden within these groups, and Secretary Mayorkas has already testified under oath that at least 42 people with connections to terrorists have come in. But what's coming in the unguarded? You mentioned the gotaways earlier.
Like Ottawa's,
Yeah,
exactly.
who's coming
Chris,
in those sections that aren't protected?
this is a question to which we must return with you very soon. This is really scary stuff. Thank you for the work you do at Numbers USA, Chris Chmielenski. Keep it up. I know you will, and I look forward to our further visits and insights into all of this and the corrective actions we must take. Next up, we'll speak with Dr. Peter Vincent Pry about a whole other set of problems, nuclear threats from Iran, among others, right after this.